Tech Talk. We have Susan Leach-Murray with us today, the State Publications Librarian. She's going to talk a little bit about digital preservation. I'm Jesse Sims. I'm the chair of Tech Talk. Peter Graham can't make it today. He's the co-chair. And Linda Kicker's our amazing secretary, helps us set all this up. There's a sign-up sheet and donuts in the back, so please sign up and grab a donut if you haven't yet. Okay, so I'll let Susan take it away.
Great, thanks. Can everybody hear me okay back there? I usually can project pretty well. So before I get started, I just wanted to thank the group for inviting me to talk about preservation. And there was kind of a note I wanted to make everybody aware. I don't claim to be an expert in preservation, so this has kind of been a job application and a learning process for me, and I'm still learning. So I'm here to kind of give you some basics of what I've learned along the way, and hopefully maybe if you have to work with preservation in the library or other things, and even personally, that you'll have a little bit of more of information understanding what preservation is. I think Jesse, we talked about if there's any questions, we'll just kind of reserve that to the end. So, okay. So getting started, so I kind of wanted just to kind of outline what I'm going to cover today, and I wanted to start with a definition of what we mean when we talk about preservation and the importance of preservation. And what I will do is talk about these things in the context of the collection that I actually work with, which is the Arizona State Publications Collection. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with that collection, but I'll kind of go over that in a couple of slides as well. And then at the end, and I think Jesse said that I think you're going to make this available to everyone. I have a couple of slides with actual links to resources, so if you want to learn about more information, it's the information that I've looked up online that's been helpful for me in my job and just figuring out what preservation means for the collection that I work with. So, before I get started, kind of wake us up, I guess, a little bit on a Thursday morning, I wanted to kind of put it out there and ask you, when you hear the word preservation, what words or phrases, or what do you think about when you hear that? There's no right or wrong answer here. So when you hear preservation, what do you think?
Archives.
Archives? Yes?
Digital scanning.
Digital scanning. How about a definition of preservation? What do you think about as far as if you had to define preservation, how would you define it?
To sustain.
Sustain, okay. Anyone else? Okay, there's not a right or wrong answer here.
Preventing decay.
Preventing decay. Yes?
Since we went through the flood, you know, what it's preventing decay, but also just preventing from catastrophe.
And I'll bring that up as far as in the context of preservation. So that's great. I think everything that everybody has talked about is relevant to preservation. When I think about preservation, and I think about access, which I think we touched upon, over time. And that time is a different element, I think, for all of us, depending on what collections we're talking about. I think about time for my collection as after I'm dead and gone, I want the things in my collection to be available for researchers that aren't even born yet. So when I talk about preservation, I tend to use the definition that was established by ALCTS. ALCTS was the Association of Library Collections Technical Services Group, which is a part of the American Library Association. And this particular definition, it focuses on digital preservation, was developed a little over 10 years ago, as you can see, in 2007. I do have a link to the actual webpage that has a definition, and it's interesting because they have a short definition, a medium definition, and a long definition of what preservation is defined. But I think if you, again, it says digital preservation combines policies, strategies, and actions that ensure access and digital content over time. So again, those things that really stick out for me are access and time. And again, that time is defined a lot of times in the collections that we're dealing with. Sometimes it's a shorter period of time versus if you think about archives, which is basically a longevity. Okay? So before I got into talking about my collection, I wanted to kind of take a step back. And some of you, hopefully maybe all of you, may recognize some of these things that are on the screen. I will admit I actually have this Fujifilm X-Card. I actually still have a Fuji camera. But I think preservation is something, at least in my mind, I I think it's something that's very new and something I think about now, but this has been going on for over 100 years because we have all these obsolete media that's been around for over 100 years. Some are still in play, but a lot of these are definitely gone away. So when you're dealing with all these different types of formats, you have to think about how am I going to preserve the content that are on these formats. So this actually comes from obsoletemedia.org. It's a web page. I believe they're out of the UK. I follow them on Twitter. It's just some of the unique items that they have on the web page, and they divide it up by audio or visual. So if you're kind of interested in all the different types of media that's been created in the last 100 years, this is a great website to go to. And so again, the reason why I brought this up is we tend to think more things that are available online, digitized, those types of things. But sometimes we have to deal with this type of media as well. But so I thought it was fun to kind of look back. Like I said, maybe not all of you may not recognize everything on there, but I certainly do. So I think someone pointed out about Burton Barr's issue has been a year and a half, is that right? And the reason why I bring this up is I think preservation by itself, I know we create policies about preservation and we have specific policies, but I think it needs to be considered in a larger context. And what I mean by that, especially about collection development. Now, if you probably know your current collection development policies in libraries, we tend to say, this is what we're going to collect. In my particular collection development policy, I also specify what I'm not going to collect. And there's other things in there and preservation is not really addressed in a collection development policy. But when I receive a donation or I'm trying to get those items that should be part of the collection, I have to think about how I'm going to preserve these items going forward. So again, just kind of thinking about preservation when you're looking at these other things, and definitely the emergency and disaster planning. What do you do if, okay, I only have a print copy? If something happens, that emergency, you've got flooding, fires, those types of things, if that's the only copy you have and something happens to it, what are you going to do? Are you going to try to preserve it? So does it make sense to digitize? I also think of this on a personal level as well, because I think about the fires that were in California and the people that lost everything in their homes. And the reason I just talked to Jesse a little bit, especially during the holidays, I think about this personally about family history, memorabilia. If I want those things to be around, I start thinking about preservation from what I've learned from working in the library of how am I going to make these things available past my generation and the next generations. So I think it is a valuable topic to think about if you're not currently working with a collection and dealing with preservation. The other thing I think is in context is what's the overall part of your institution's mission and values. And this is one of the things that I'm really proud of as far as for the State of Arizona Research Library. Because as part of our mission, preservation is a part of this already. So I think that's a great step to get your institution to realize if preservation is important to you, and if you have some unique collections, that it should be part of what your mission and goals and values are for the institution. And this is actually the mission, is providing access, preserving Arizona. There it is, right there, preserving Arizona. And that's the actual statement is there. Along with our actual values, and this is listed as actually number 2 of our values at the library, preserving Arizona's history for future generations. Definitely not the definition of preservation, but I think it goes to saying that this is important to us and this is what we're trying to do. Okay, so before I want to talk about the collection and what I've been working on as far as the actions and strategies that I've been taking with the collection that I've been working with. And I don't know how familiar you are with the actual State of Arizona Publications collection, but I wanted just to give a brief overview if you're not familiar with that. So this collection goes back to territorial days before Arizona became a state. Yes, we do have some interesting territorial documents. And you can think, and I can't say we have the most interesting as far as, everybody wants to see those things. If you think about any state agency and those things that actually are published, annual reports, statistics, audits done by the Auditor General, studies that have been done that maybe they're working on particular things for the agency, those are typically those types of things that are in the collection. I will say this, that at one time before computers, when all they had was print, that's all we had to distribute information from state agencies, they collected everything, down to a bookmark and a pamphlet. That brings me to the point about the revised collection development policy. Oh, and by the way, we are established as the official state repository for agency publications by statute under Title 41. So getting back to this collection development policy that I revised about 1.5 years ago, it's impossible to collect everything. We do have those older items, but going forward, we're focusing more on those things that are valuable to researchers. Statistics are some things that are, like I said, studies that are published. Some of the agencies that I love is the Department of Transportation. It's probably one of the largest agencies that publishes. If you think they do anything on a whim, they do not. They are studied and things are actually published of why they made a decision to do this or put a road here. The Auditor General is another one of my favorites because they do audits. So I kind of see that, oh, they had a problem with financial management over here. They look at schools, they look at other state agencies. So it's kind of boring because it deals with dollars and those types of things, but it's kind of interesting the things that come up in the news and the audits that are actually done. So in working with the collection itself, the collection development policy, it became apparent to me that preservation should be a part of this. And it technically was not, as far as documentation, I couldn't find anything. I'm sure it was a discussion of, how many items do we need to keep? And at one time, they were keeping 5 or 6 copies of those print items. Again, this is before computers. So part of the collection development policy kind of forced me to think, well, how many copies do I really want to take? And I think moving in the direction of more of what gets published online. So I'm starting to develop a preservation strategy, and so I have taken some actions with the collection that I'll talk about in a little bit, exactly what I've been doing with the collection. So before I figured out, well, how many copies should I be collecting? What should I be doing with preservation? What do I do with just online publications? I went to a Digital Power Institute, and it was a hands-on institute at ASU this year in June. And it was boots on the ground. This is when you're trying to preserve particular file formats. And for the collection of the state of Arizona publications collection, we digitize everything on PDF. So these standards, which are the NDSA standards, and that's the National Digital Stewardship Alliance, has come up with this chart. So this chart has helped me figure out how many copies of things I need to keep, and in order to preserve things, what do I need to do? And you probably can't read too well the chart. It is, I do have a link to that on my references, but let me just kind of go over this a little bit. So on the left-hand side is kind of all of the categories that you should be considering, especially when you're dealing with something that's digital or online. So the first part is storage and geographic location. So if you only have that one print copy somewhere and something happens in your building, what are you going to do? And even when you're dealing with PDF or a digital format, you shouldn't have it in one place. You should have it in multiple places. So that deals with geographic location. And this is not a time frame. There's no time frame to this. So if you notice the columns from the left-hand side to the right, they're level 1, 2, 3, and 4. Level 4 is your desirables. So I'm striving to get to level 4 in all these particular categories. Does that make sense? And trust me, I wasn't even at level 4 when I started. And that's kind of the assumption it is for a lot of people who deal with collections, unique collections as well. So the next part, we talked about file fixity and data integrity. Now, I'm not a tech person. I'm not a coder. So when I went to the Digital Power Institute, what I came away with that is it's basically to make sure the files, especially the digital files that you put in these different locations, that they don't get corrupted. And when you need to and pull it down to use it, maybe you need to make another copy, that you're going to be able to access it and not have any problems. So it's doing some things in the background. There's checksum was something that was free I can do on files. That's the other thing that comes into play is the personnel that you have that can work on this, the time that involves, and money. because I think there's some assumptions that, oh, everything's online and it's free. Well, no. Because to me, even if something's in print, I mean, you're taking up a space on a shelf, right? Okay? But if you take that away, you're like, oh yeah, we have more space, but you're putting it maybe over here somewhere online. Well, servers aren't free. And I think some of the decision makers forget about that. That you're taking away maybe that shelf cost, but you have to put it somewhere else. And so I think they can free up more dollars by digitizing everything, but it's like, yes, but I need space to put this. And we're not just talking about a Google Drive amount of space. We have a newspaper collection that takes up terabytes in space. So definitely there. So information security. So this is something that I didn't think about. So one of the places that I have my online PDFs, or my PDFs, is on a shared drive on a local computer. Okay? These are not ideal for me, so I had to kind of make things work currently the best I can. It was not password protected. So what does that mean? That means anybody in our staff, and not that I don't trust our staff, but other people can go in there and if they want, delete it, whatever. Now the Arizona State Publications Collection, it is not under copyright per se. It's owned by the agency, but it's freely available. You don't have to pay to view these things, or whether it's in print or online. But I can't really do much about the integrity of keeping all the files that I need to if I don't somehow protect it. So I thought originally I wanted to password protect the folder, but IT, talking with them, we decided we would let everybody get access, but only give them certain permissions. So unfortunately, Amelia only gets read permissions. I get admin positions, so I can get in there and move the files around and do the organization. The other part for that, I'll talk a little bit about, is where I put my second copy for my own, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Metadata. Now, I'm a cataloger, so bibliographic metadata I can do. There's also preservation metadata. I think this really comes into play, especially for photo collections in that information. So it's something that I don't have to deal with as much, but that's something to consider of being, you want to preserve as well, is the actual metadata, not just bibliographical, but there's preservation metadata as well. And definitely the file formats. I do know that I just received last week a CD copy of an annual report. I already have 2 copies of the print and I have 1 online. Any idea what I did with that CD? I don't have it. I think, do you have a CD drive on your computer? How many people actually have a CD drive on their computer at work? Okay, you don't have a floppy disk, right? That's all good. So again, kind of getting back to that collection development policy, I'm like, okay, so I have 3 other copies, and so that just kind of went by the wayside. It was great that they provided it at one time, and it was actually from like 2004, I think, or whatnot. So again, kind of that collection development policy plays into my preservation as well. File formats, I really only deal with 2, print and the PDFs. I know there's other file formats people did with photo collections, your images and so on, but those are considerations of what you need to do when you have those different file formats in your collection. Does that make sense? So again, this is not you need to be over here by this certain period of time. It's somewhere to strive for, and the specific categories that you should be thinking about to preserve those items for the future. Okay. So, getting back to the collection, which I've indicated a little bit so far, so what am I actually doing? So, the majority of the collection is in print, but we're trying to digitize and get things online or not. Is anyone familiar with the Arizona Memory Project? Okay, so, I know you are. The Arizona State Publications Collection is a collection that sits within Arizona Memory Project, and there's over 30,000 items in that collection. But even had that being said, most of the collection is still in print. Again, we go back to territorial days. So we are in the process of trying to get more and more digitized online. So that's why you have here, when I get a print copy, as at one time they used to keep 5 or 6, we don't do that anymore. One is an access copy, and that actually goes into the archives building. So if someone comes to our reading room and wants to see the print, or we need to do an ILL, and but that is the copy that gets, people touch that one, excuse me. The other one is a preservation copy that goes into the building across the street in a vault. And that's the kind of like, only touch that if you have to. So that's kind of my preservation copy, and we try to digitize it. So a lot of times we get requests for older things that are not digitized yet, and that's our opportunity going, okay, we'll get that one online. A lot of times we'll digitize things, scan them, and send them by email, and then we upload them to the collection on the Arizona Memory Project. Online, this is my big challenge, and I think we touched upon it a little bit, talking about, well, what happens when things are no longer in print? And I'm trying to prepare for that, because I see in the next 10 years it's probably going to be less. The government's going to go, you no longer have to put that in print. Has to be available online, but no longer have to print because of the cost of print. So that's what I'm trying to prepare for. So right now I talked about I house the kind of local copy, I guess you could say, on a local shares drive. Okay, that's in the process of being restricted. If you went back to the chart, the ultimate thing is to have another copy somewhere in a preservation system, usually an outside vendor. It could be local, but right now the decision was made that we're not making that decision. We are going to continue the conversation at some point in the future, but right now I don't have the okay to go look for a vendor to say, hey, can I purchase a subscription to start putting my files in a vendor. So my option is this extra external hard drive. So that's kind of my intermediary of like, okay, it's not the ideal, it's not level 4, but hey, it works. So I have 2 copies at least. So one on the shares drive, so that one goes kaput. I at least have another one and vice versa. So we just purchased this, and it was this week that I was able to, I just copy this folder that I have for the collection on the shares drive over to the external hard drive. It took probably 3 or 4 hours to transfer everything. But again, it's something that I feel better about, that I have 2 copies of the online format. It's not the ideal, but at least I'm getting closer to level 4. It's better than I was before. So our next steps, I talk about getting closer to level 4 in all those categories, and looking again to continue the conversation about cloud storage. Like I said, I'm not convinced, and this is my opinion, that local IT, they're great, but I'm not sure they really understand the needs, especially from the library and what we want to do with our formats, preserving and going forward. So I tend to kind of like, oh, can we look for something else? But hopefully that conversation will continue. So what have I learned so far? A lot. Like I said, before this job, preservation really wasn't part of my day-to-day thinking in terms of a collection. So I think that's one of the biggest things, is my mindset has changed a little bit. So I'm constantly thinking about, well, how do I preserve this and going forward there. So I think definitely having this ongoing conversation for both your institution and within the profession. I mean, I think back to when I received my degree, unless you were doing an archives class, preservation was not ever part of the conversation in any of my courses. And I think it should be. And it could be a whole course by itself, but I think, again, that online environment, the publishing of more things that are online, and be able to preserve those things and accessible for in the future, I think it's something that we all need to consider. And we can't collect everything. And that's why it's great to have a collection development policy. We have to be strategic on what we're actually collecting. Continually to strive for level 4. So, I thought I did great this year and what I was able to accomplish. I may not be able to get anywhere in the next 2 years. I don't know. It's just, you kind of have to play that game of, how can you move forward, but you do the best you can. The other thing I've been thinking about lately is archives, and how some of our thinking and some of our standards kind of overlap. I guess I'm lucky enough to work right by the archives building and getting to know some of that personnel, going, so how do you guys deal with this? And they have a whole different viewpoint on, strategies and what they do for us preserving, but I think it's good to kind of hear what they do. Not necessarily that I'm going to adopt their practices, but I had a conversation with one of the personnel, and we were looking at, they archive websites for state agencies. And I kind of said, well, this is my problem. What do you suggest? So it was great just kind of hear her suggestion. It was about the online, what do I do about putting, a copy online? I mean, considering the collection and the amount of memory that I have to deal with right now, she's like, put it on Google Drive. But then I think, okay, if I do that, then what happens as the collection gets bigger? But it just gave me another option to think about, because I thought, all right, if they're not going to sign off on a PO to purchase an external hard drive, I guess I could do Google Drive. So at least having somewhere to have a second copy. Not my ideal solution, but I think it's something I could work with. And the constant monitoring the changes in the field. This really took me for a loop this month, because two things I'm going to talk about that has changed as I kind of continue to monitor what's happening with preservation. One was, and I don't know if you've heard, you ever heard of digitalpreservation.gov? It's something that the Library of Congress had as a webpage that dealt with digital preservation. At the end of this month, that webpage and that information is no longer going to exist. And it's very incomplete, the statement they have on the website. So I don't know if they're incorporating this preservation, digital preservation into all collections, or I don't know, is it becoming subscription-based? And if you want that information, I have no idea. The other thing that just came out, and if you heard of Digital Preservation Network, has anybody? It was actually a vendor that helped libraries and members to preserve their collections, their online collections. Because of, I would say, finance, it's another thing. The Board of Trustees basically made a decision this month that at the beginning of next year, they're no longer going to exist. They're going to basically shut down, so they're trying to work at the members who are currently subscribed to their service of what they're going to do with their collections. So it's changing all the time. So yeah, that's you kind of worry, like if I choose this, you're probably going to have to deal with something in the 5 years. I don't know, but I think it's definitely a changing. But I hope there's some good outcomes from more and more talking about preservation, what we're going to do with the collections, and what tools that we have that we can use. So I think it's constantly changing. The last two slides are basically the resources that I use either in the presentation, or they're good starting points if you want to learn more about preservation. And I try to pull from different aspects. So not everything is from ALA, the American Library Association. This one on the bottom, the theory and craft of digital preservation, I have not had a chance to even look at it. It has just come out. I believe his name was it Trevor Owens from the Library of Congress, deals with digital content. This is actually linked to his manuscript that he's actually submitting for publication about digital preservation. So I haven't even had a chance to even look at this. But he's kind of one person I tend to follow, and what things are happening at the Library of Congress as well. So that's why I kind of stuck that on there. There's definitely Library of Congress. I put up there about the Digital Power Institute, and that was actually done at ASU this year. So that's kind of how I got lucky that it was local, and I was able to attend through kind of they didn't require us to pay to go there, so that was kind of nice. And they have them all throughout the United States. I don't know if I think it's a group of libraries and librarians that have a grant to actually kind of do this boots on the ground kind of thing around different geographic locations in the country. To kind of us, the smaller people, or I guess that, give them information and tools they can use actually for their collections. So that if you get a chance to participate in that, I would highly recommend it. I got a lot out of it. Like it was definitely hands-on. And here's some just other information as well about digital preservation. Yeah, I did put anything on there about Wikipedia. I do. I do submit information to Wikipedia. I now have a new look on Wikipedia, so I don't do it all the time, but I do try to help promote our collection through information about people and institutions here for Arizona. So that's all I'll have for you today. Does anybody have any questions? Yes?
I have a question / comment. You were talking about the difficulty sometimes of explaining the importance of preservation to maybe somebody that's thinking strictly from an IT perspective. I think a good way is to point to some of the recent hacks in like Atlanta where they encrypt all their data. And if you read the news stories, the institutions that got back up the fastest are the ones that were reaching for that level 4 preservation. So they didn't get all their stuff locked down they couldn't do anything about it, and then they either had to pay or just, take the loss. And for something as important as, like an Arizona state publications, you would think that, if you can present it in that way, it's like, right now this is kind of a soft target. We really need to move towards having that redundancy. So, was that part of the conversation, or what was the sort of hang up they had? Was it just money?
Well, I think you have to look at our organizational structure. So, is everybody familiar that we are under the Secretary of State, right? So what's the number one priority with the Secretary of State?
Not spending money.
Elections. So it's not that they're not listening to us. I think there's decisions about what's prioritized. But I definitely agree with you. The more that we can bring to the table to explain the need for this, and it's going to have to be a continual conversation, probably the same conversation with multiple people over and over again. But by using the standard, and we had our first meeting last month, and I brought that chart.
Right.
And I said, here's where I'm trying to strive for. And person in the IT department, when we were discussing kind of the local possibility, he goes, we could do level 4 right here. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not convinced that the local IT, they have other priorities.
Right.
It's great, I think, that they made some type of an offer, and I think he kind of spoke out of turn a little bit, because his boss was in the meeting, and I was like, is this good or bad? I don't know. So I think it definitely pushed the envelope a little bit to say, okay, he kind of put that out there, and he wasn't refuting that they couldn't do that, but now the conversation's going in a different direction.
Right.
But yeah, I think the more that we can bring to the table, it's explaining why these things are needed. But I think there's some biasness and there's priorities, and I understand that. But we just gotta keep singing our tune. Hopefully the right person will come along and listen to you, and again, maybe move me a little bit closer to level 4. But I was really glad to hear, like, oh, you could do level 4. I'm like, I don't know what that would take, but that really perked my ears up going, okay, well, at least I've got someone who, and they took that chart with them. So I think that was kind of, instead of me trying to explain that, and I am not an IT person or, a coder or anything, I'm dangerous, I guess. I know enough to get by, but I think that was helpful from an IT perspective to see this is what we're actually trying to accomplish. And it was in terms I think they understood. And I know that I would not be able to communicate that verbally to him. So, yeah. Any other questions? Could be about the collection, doesn't have to be about preservation. Yes?
So one of the things you said that you are saving everything as PDFs.
Yes.
Is there any concern about proprietary formats and things like that?
Yes.
So what is being done to mitigate that danger?
Nothing, ma'am.
Okay. Are we doing things, because one of the things I'd always thought about with file preservation is you need to have the readers saved as well, and you need to have different versions of the readers saved in order to actually look at it. It's the same way, like, you can't read a floppy drive without the floppy drive.
Right, that old technology yeah, exactly.
But it's the same case for these different file formats. If the codecs change too much, they can't read the old stuff.
I think one of the things I'm not making an excuse for myself. I'm trying not to. It's interesting because we did talk about that old technology and what do you do? So in 20 years, when you no longer can access that, what are you going to do? What I got out of the Digital Power Institute is, I think at some point we're going to convert something over. I mean, we have the original, but we continue this conversion process as we get down the line. I'm hoping I'm retired or maybe dead by then when that happens. But I know that's not forever. That file format's not forever. And I'll admit that's just not something right now I'm addressing. I'm trying to get things organized. I became manager of this collection about 1.5 years ago, and it's just enough trying to figure out what the organization was, because there wasn't anything. So basically what happened is everything that was online, they dumped in a folder. Even things that were not online. I'm trying to go through that folder to figure out what's online and what's not. So I'm like way down at the early stages, but I'm trying to move you know, move the collection. I always think of it this way. There's things I'd like to do. I'm only the one person that deals with this. I want to leave the collection better when I leave. It's not going to be the best, I will admit to that, but it's better than it was when I received it. And that's kind of my personal goal, is to do the best I can. But I totally am in agreement with you, but I'll admit I just don't think about it.
On that note, preservation is it's like security. It's a never-ending job, you know. And with that, I was wondering, do you guys have, because one of the things you learn a lot about is digital preservation plans as a sort of guiding structure to push you. So if you are doing PDF, you know, that's written in a plan somewhere that's acceptable at this point. So I was just wondering, do you guys have a digital preservation plan? And if not, is there that might be a great, you know, starting point, like you mentioned, the stewardship of the collection going forward, where you can kind of create this base where you're starting at, and then sort of the decisions will be more justified kind of going forward, and people can kind of start to adhere to a standard based around that plan.
No, and that's something that I need to work on. So as dealing with this collection and everything else that I have to deal with, I know that I have to get this written down. Right. So that's kind of my goal for next year, is because at first I wasn't sure what I needed to do.
Right,
so once I think I figured that out, I'm like, okay, so now I know what decisions I've made, and now I need to get those things written down. Right. So that's definitely on my radar to complete. But and I'm always the one usually going, so is it documented somewhere? And I have to admit I don't have anything. I was like, where is that at? I can't find that. So my my coin phrase is, so if you get hit by a bus tomorrow, is anybody gonna know how to do that? The answer is no. It's like, yes. So I'm glad you brought that up, and it's on my to-do list. So. But I think I had to figure out what I was doing first in order to get the plan. So I think now that I have my supervisor on board and other ones, that I think that I can start to put things on paper and say, this is what we're doing, and think about what do we need to do going forward.
Right.
Yes?
I don't mean to put you on the spot, so I sort of know the answer to this question, but I'm also curious to know if you know what other states are doing in this. So one thing that you've mentioned multiple times is that lots of copies keep stuff safe. Physical copies and digital copies. You want multiple copies of both. And so I know that you have multiple copies within our institution. Have you talked to other institutions around the state, or do you know if there are other states where some of that digital storage is being distributed? So, like with the Federal Depository Library program, for example, where you've got a bunch of libraries across the nation, and this is mostly for physical items, where you have all of those copies in several places in the state. Do you know if anybody's doing that with digital copies?
I don't. And the strange thing is, as you know, I'm just starting to reach out to who are my peeps around the country. I don't know, and I'm just learning, and these are conversations I want to have with them. But I do not know if anybody's in the state. I mean, you know, ASU has a collection, NAU, and these are continuing conversations that I want to have to say, well, what are you doing? You know, and I'm glad you brought that up, but it's again kind of on my radar down to here. Like, I want to get to that conversation, but I'm trying to do some more outreach. I will praise Amelia. She was able to make some contacts at FDLP conference to go, here's someone that you should know. So I'm in contact with someone in Washington, also North Carolina, and I believe it was Mississippi. I've just got a contact. So my initial after the first of the year is we're going to get on the phone and going, okay, so what do you do with your collection? It's trying to figure out who my peeps are, who has similar collections, and what are you doing? I don't even know that at that point. So, but yes, I think that needs to be part of the conversation. Like, what are you doing for your preservation of your collection, and can we do collaboration and partnerships? I think that's important too, and it's not always another state's collection, similar collection, but you know, maybe it's something locally. I don't know. So I think libraries I think there can be some collaboration there that we all can benefit from. But again, I think starting and having those conversations would be a good thing. Any other questions? Yes?
So Scottsdale is doing a big push to do what do they call it? Scottsdale Heritage, something. And they're building a big flashy new space and they're making it all exciting.
A physical space?
Yes.
Okay.
And they fundraised and they got all this money and it's kind of exciting to librarians, but how do you make it exciting to people who are not librarians? We give you access and we're like, ooh, look, you can access
I will
this.
tell you, I'm willing to try almost anything at least once. I think Jessica and I were talking about this, and I'm going to back up a little bit here. Access is not preservation. So I think it's great that we need different channels to promote those things towards people. And the first thing that came to my mind when you asked that is I'm rereading a book about social media and knowing our audience and what they want from us and not making the assumption that we know what they need. So I think it's understanding the audience to get them what they need. Does that kind of make sense? Because I heard more like, how do we make this accessible and let people know that we have this? Is that kind of what you were asking?
Yes, and also the people who are stakeholders have a very specific idea of what Scottsdale is. These
Okay.
are nice ladies who lunch and raise money for the library.
Good to have.
Yes,
Good to
we love
have.
them. We love them. And they're gonna throw a big party and it'll be all flashy, but it's, I'm not explaining this well, but trying to continue the mission of the library in this context is not as straightforward as we thought it would be.
Yeah. I don't have a great answer for you, but I think, have you started the conversation?
I'm totally unimportant.
I think that's the important part because, I mean, we've all been around. I think a lot of times we have false assumptions. And I ask a lot of questions because sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm a logical person, I'm a visual person, so I'm like, if you say, oh, we're going to here and here, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, how did you get to there? What made you cause to get that decision? But so I think the first step would have a conversation. What's your goals? What's your ultimate goals, and how can the library be a part of that? And I don't know whether that's already been discussed. I don't know. It sounds like these ladies, I think I would love to have a relationship with. If they could raise money.
So they're putting out the yearbooks because everybody wants to see pictures
Right.
of themselves when they're teenagers.
So I think that looking at those areas, common interests, and having or starting a discussion there. I think that would be my advice. I'm not sure that's the best route, but if it was me, I think that's what I would look at. Is where are we? Where are the commonalities?
Yes, and it's a surprise to me that this has been made a priority at Scottsdale. I mean, they raised $100,000.
Wow.
It was just granted, or it was just handed over last night in front of City Council. I've never seen Scottsdale raise $100,000 for anything. So this is like a shining star.
As I say, I would definitely look this as an opportunity.
Yeah.
And I would definitely try to get into the conversation, somehow get into that conversation and bring in the commonalities, things that interest you both, and work from there. If they can raise that kind of money, like I said, I need to know who they are.
A related question is I'm sort of like adjacent, connected to this stuff, is that there's been a big disconnect with like the managers who are communicating with this group. And this group has their own tunnel vision, they want X, Y, Z. Do you have any kind of tips for communicating like preservation and things like that to your managers in a way to kind of like get them to, I don't know.
I will be the first to admit sometimes my approach isn't always the best because I think differently, I think in a different mode. So I think it's learning on how they hear best. I don't know how to describe it.
Okay, yeah.
How can I take my message that they're going to be receptive to?
Okay.
And I'll admit, I go like, I need somebody else to talk about this because if I talk about it, sometimes the reaction that I get is totally different. So I tend to go, oh, they tend to like them better. So hey, I'm not afraid to admit, let's get somebody else to do this. So not that our message is totally different, but it's a different person, and their reception to some people are different. So I would try multiple ways and even different ways to get your message across. You know, I don't know, is it better person to person? Is it better in an email? So I think there's different ways that you can continue, but it's a conversation and communication I think you have to continue to, you can't just do it once and you're done.
Yeah.
I think we deal a lot with, you know, you have staff that, you know, come and go. So that message gets lost. I'm learning that from the collection itself. I mean, some of the agencies used to have libraries. The Game and Fish, they no longer have a library. We got other stuff. But because of staff turnover, I'm not sure who knows what things I need. So I think it's a continual conversation and looking for those people that can help you, I think. So, but continuing that conversation, it's cyclical. It's over and over again. I don't think you ever are going to say, "Great, I no longer have to talk about preservation because something new will come along, some new personnel, and here we go again." It's a learning process. I don't always get the message right, but that doesn't mean I don't continue continue trying. So definitely look for the important stakeholders. Maybe there's certain people that you know better than others. Kind of, figure out, this is kind of like a strategic game. And looking for ways that maybe to, a different person to send the message, change the way that you send the message. I think I would try multiple things and see what works.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's helpful.
Any other questions? Yes?
Are there any resources available or possible sources of grants for, say, a small to mid-sized library that is underfunded and understaffed that would like to try to start preserving some of the information that the city is going to give to them?
That is a great question, because I've started to think about that. Well, if I can't get the money from my organization, can I go somewhere else? And that's an area that I haven't explored a whole lot in. But I definitely think it's worth looking into. Again, kind of like looking for my peeps, going, well, how do you do this? I think there's different organizations, a couple different links to different organizations I haven't looked on as far as grant possibilities there, but I think that's definitely a great idea to look for.
Just call it Scottsdale, maybe.
Yeah, no, there you go. Right
They
there.
all wear pearls, you can spot them.
But yeah, that's just one part I haven't thought about much about. But I definitely thought about, well, if I had more money, I could do this. But I haven't come across anything that says, hey, we'll give you this so much money for preservation and whatnot. And I feel like I just haven't found the right group yet. Or where do I need to go to look for those things? I'm not sure. I'm willing to share with anybody once I find that. So, but I would continue to look and ask other people. And that's I'm kind of doing this kind of the ground up kind of way, because I don't really have a predecessor that's like, okay, so what did they do before? I'm kind of like, sometimes I make it up as I go along, because I don't know. I don't have anything to go on. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
It might fall under LSTA if you pitch it as a collection.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah.
That's true.
I think we have to look for those unique opportunities and, yeah.
Sorry,
That's okay.
She's asking me if we got grants to do stuff. Yes, that's how we do most of our collection, and it's we have a bunch. There's a North Indian Ben Wash Superfund site in Scottsdale, and so we digitized the documents in 2006, 2017 through the state library, the River Carroll and stuff. And we use it was a grant through it was Indian casino money, but it was really broadly written, so anything related to history, and so we were able to use that. So
I would definitely be interested in continuing a preservation conversation with libraries, locally and throughout the state, because I think it's something we all started with, because you may have just a small, unique collection. Others have larger collections. I'd like to learn what ASU universities are doing. Now, granted, they have a lot more money and personnel, but try to look for partnerships and collaboration too. So I'm definitely interested in continuing the conversation and keeping the conversation going. It's something we need to think about, preservation. So again, that's one of the things that I guess I'm proud of myself on, is because I now start to think of that on a daily basis when something comes up about the collection. So I couldn't say that 2 years ago, that I was thinking about that, and now I'm more cognizant of what I need to do in order to preserve these things and how do I get those. So those questions keep coming up every day, and that wasn't the case 2 years ago. Any other questions? Great. Well, thanks for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.